Welcome to CivilNet. As part of our series CivilNet Backstage at Aurora, we are going to be speaking with several of the Aurora Humanitarian Initiative weekend guests. Today's guest is Professor Bernard Coulie, who is at the Catholic University in Belgium and is a classicist and an expert on matters of ancient Armenia and ancient Armenian. Did I say that right?
Yes, it's absolutely true.
Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Եվ գիտեմ, որ այս կրնանք նույն հեշտությամբ հայերենով անել, բայց անգլերեն պիտի խոսենք, ոչինչ։
Շատ շնորհակալություն։
We could easily be doing this interview in Armenian with Professor Coulie, but we're going to do this in English to make it easy for the rest of us. Professor Coulie, you're a classicist, but not in the classic understanding of just Greece and Rome. How did you end up heading east?
Well, I started studying Greek and Latin, just pure classicist, and then I studied ancient Oriental languages, Byzantine Greek, ancient Armenian, ancient Georgian. And this is the way because I was interested in the spreading of the classical culture in the Middle East through the Byzantine Empire and through what we call the Christian East, the Christian Orient. This is why I studied these languages.
And you just said it with ease, and I nodded with ease. Yes, of course, classic Armenian and classic Georgian. Yes. And how long did it take to master those two languages, and who was the teacher?
I'm still learning, so I don't think I already mastered them. I'm always learning. And I had good teachers at the university because at my university, the Louvain University in Belgium, we have a very long tradition in the study and research in languages of the Christian East for more than 2 centuries. So we have teachers, libraries, facilities. So I'm just a product of the Louvain School of Oriental Languages.
And do you have students?
Well, not that much, but still we have students. There are always young people interested in the study of these languages and cultures. Yes.
And, you know, in both of my countries, Armenia and the United States, the issue of humanities studies and their efficiency, their relevance is a huge topic. Is it for you and your students and your country and Europe?
Of course it is. In all countries, also in Belgium, there is always a questioning about the usefulness of these studies. Yes, of course. Yes.
And yet?
But still there are some students, we are trying to explain them how important it can be to understand. What's the matter finally is understanding the cultures of other people in order to get in touch with these people and not to fight with them all the time. We are in a world full of fightings and struggles. Understanding the culture, that's the best way to achieve peace.
It's interesting that your message fits perfectly with the Aurora message, and that is shared humanity, understanding each other's pain, doing something about it, and in many ways is perfectly appropriate for Armenia, because we both expect the world to understand us and are in a region of the world that we really damn well better understand them. So let's pursue this a little bit and talk about the courses that you teach that are not just ancient Armenian and ancient Georgian. I noticed that you teach a course on the foundations, the roots of European integration.
Of European culture and European identity, that's right.
So, and how do you go? Where do you start?
Well, that's very interesting, but to make a long story short, so I studied Greek and Latin. These are the real roots of European culture. Then I moved eastwards, Byzantine Empire, Christian East, and then I landed here. So I came to Georgia, I came to Armenia many times, I met friends and colleagues, and I was asking them whether they felt Europeans or not. And they told me that they were feeling Europeans, that they were feeling that they are part of the European history and the European culture. And so it gave me the idea of starting working on that topic with the advantage of knowing both the roots of the European culture, being a classicist, but also being able to look at that from the outside or from the limit, the border of the European zone. So as a specialist of Armenian culture or Georgian culture, it was very interesting to look at what European culture is. So this is what brought me there.
So if you were to teach a course on Armenians and the Armenian experience as part of the global experience, what would you tell us about us that we maybe have forgotten over this last 100 years because of the Soviet isolation, because of the post-genocide trauma? You know, we increasingly see ourselves in the silo, and yet for centuries we weren't.
No, indeed, you're absolutely right. I think what the peculiarity of Armenian history is that it's the history of a people who has always been in touch with all the neighbors, all the other people. Armenians were merchants, translators, texts were translated and circulating all over the Middle East and Europe. So Armenians have always been intermediaries, interfaces between other cultures. And now they consider more and more themselves as a culture per se, as independently of what's around them. But it has never been that in the past.
If we know any of that, just at the lay level, you know, obviously the scholars do the scholarship, but at the lay level, if we know any of that, we know it in the context of the 16th, 17th, 18th century traders, Far East, Europe, India, Persia. But if we go backwards to the period of Mesrop Mashtots and forward, what was that interaction?
Well, actually, there was, of course, a local root of the Armenian culture, rooted here in the, let's say, in Eastern Anatolia, South Caucasus region. But many of the ideas, the concepts, the logical concept of the Armenian culture, they were brought from the classical culture, from Greek, through translations from Greek text to Armenian. So many texts were translated from Greek into Armenian, from Syriac into Armenian. And so Armenian has been the receptacle, the place where all these elements came together to form a new culture.
Is it fair to say that most of those texts were religious texts or no?
Well, everything was religious in that time, so that's really a modern assessment too. So everything was religious, but there were, of course, biblical texts, theological ones, but also historical texts. All the Armenian chronicles, they were also inspired by Greek models or by Byzantine models. There were scientific texts, there was poetry. The life was religious, but the culture was much more than that.
If you were to describe the Madenataran, the manuscript depository library, is it an adequate source of primary sources about that era? Are there things that as policy or as national policy we should be looking at to do in order to both protect and promote, make accessible that material?
Well, of course, the Madenataran is the main repository of Armenian manuscripts. Almost 2/3 of the Armenian manuscripts in the world are in the Madenataran. The rest is in other libraries all over the world. It's a fantastic institution, well organized. The manuscripts are kept and preserved in very good conditions. I've been working there already many times, so that's really a great place. And I think the Madenataran and the Republic of Armenia supporting the Madenataran, they are doing a lot for the defense of the roots of the Armenian culture, indeed.
I meant to ask you a question about identity a minute ago, and I didn't. In both directions, have Europeans seen Armenians as Europe? And in the centuries past, did Armenians see themselves as part of Europe? Because that's as contemporary a question as there can be.
I think Armenians have always considered themselves as part of Europe, although being a little bit different, but that's also true for the people of Finland or Greece. Okay, each people has its own specific, but still they feel that they belong to a kind of European community. Now, what regards Europe, I think Europeans do not consider Armenians as Europeans for many reasons, probably for geographical reasons, because Turkey is in between, and it has become kind of a buffer zone, I would say so. But also, if I may say so, because of the quest for the recognition of the genocide. So in Europe, Armenians are mainly known as the people who is asking for the recognition of the genocide. And I think that's really limitative. Armenian is much more than that. But today in Europe, Armenians are mainly considered as people struggling for the recognition of the genocide.
So if I were to rephrase what you said, Armenians in Europe, I might add not only in Europe, present themselves as a one-issue nation.
Absolutely.
And that, therefore, is a turnoff, or it simply doesn't provide enough information for Europe to see Armenians as part of the whole?
No, it's because Europeans don't necessarily want to be involved in that question. They are probably ready to support Armenians and to fight for the recognition of the genocide, but they don't necessarily want to have difficulties with Turkey. So they don't want to be put in a corner and to be obliged to decide between Armenians and Turks, for instance. This is the point.
And if we go back 120 years, then what would your answer have been? If we go pre-genocide, because to a great extent we trace our modern history to the interaction of Armenian scholars who went to Europe, came back with the values of Europe and all of that. So if we went back 120 years, would you say the same thing?
No,
about Europe's perception?
No, I think the perception was much more open. It was less conflictual, so there was not the feeling that there was a conflictual issue around Armenians, so it was much easier before 1950.
How much of the same thing would you say for Georgia? Or are they really two different entities on two very different paths?
Well, the Armenians and Georgians are pretty different. Of course, seen from Europe or from Belgium or from Brussels, they could look a little bit the same, but actually they are very, very different. But there are main differences. There is not a Georgian diaspora like it is in the Armenian case. There is not the question of the genocide. And also, Georgia is a more open country than Armenia for obvious geographic reasons. There is the sea. So it's a more international country than Armenia.
Is it possible to explain the Armenian and Georgian differences in many ways from Europe by the fact that we did not go through the Reformation, the Enlightenment, and that whole process of examining your institutions and choosing to, at the very least, reform them, if not change them? Is that an explanation for any aspect of our social and political development?
Well, it's not totally true that Armenians and Georgians have not gone through enlightenment. They have gone through, but in an indirect manner, because they were in contacts with, especially with the British, actually, in India and in the Far East. But it's not. They were not totally part of the European history after the Renaissance. So there was no Renaissance in the East. That's a specific West European topic, Renaissance. There was no Renaissance in Byzantium or in Armenia and Georgia, and therefore the Enlightenment was pretty much different as well. So since the end of the Middle Age, the histories were going apart between Western Europe and, I would say, Eastern Europe, and more, I would say that Armenia and Georgia belong to the Eastern European history and not to the Western European one.
So let's talk about today. In addition to being a scholar and a professor, you're a tour guide.
That's true.
What does that mean? What do you do?
Well, indeed, for almost 10 years now, I've been organizing trips here in Armenia, as I do in Georgia as well, just because I wanted to share my passion and the very little knowledge I have about these countries, and to raise awareness in the Belgian public, because my group has mainly Belgian groups, awareness about Armenia and Georgia, because I think it's not enough known, recognized, and the specifics are not enough recognized in Europe, so I'm just doing that. Yes.
And who are these tourists who come along with you?
Well, these are clubs, associations, or it depends. Usually there are people who have the means to come here and the time to come, so retired people most of the time.
Mostly professionals?
Sometimes I have professionals, already guided groups from companies, leaders. Sometimes these are more cultural groups. It depends. So I have 2 or 3 groups a year, and I enjoy doing that very much.
Well, thank you. We're glad you're here.
Thank you.
We're glad you do what you do.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for following CivilNet Backstage at Aurora.